Actually, I have two things I would like to demo. A new feature, C# expressions, and a new module called save. Well, it's called file storage, and it has two activities called save file and open file. Don't know if you guys have any topics you would like to discuss, or maybe you have demos.
I don't have any topic. I just see that your PR about the C# expression. Maybe you will talk about it, but I see that you remove the JavaScript to put the C# expression in place.
No,
Or I'm
no,
wrong?
no.
Okay.
It's an addition. It's not a replacement.
Okay. So I don't understand the comment in the pull request.
Let's have a look. Let's
But
see.
you say it removes the use JavaScript integration.
So are you reading the auto PR body? Because if that's so, then you can ignore
yes, it's a auto PR body, but in the core, not in the studio. So the IA for auto PR is awesome, but maybe it doesn't write the good thing.
Yeah, so it just goes to show you and I are not out of a job anytime soon. If it doesn't even understand these simple code changes. Let's see what it says. Remove redundant code, unit test.
And in the summary, it says
Use JavaScript integration method from module extensions and delete. Yeah, yeah. I don't blame you for thinking I'm removing this feature, but I can assure you that's not the case. No,
okay,
it's
because it could be okay, but if it is the case, I just want to know why. But it's we keep the JavaScript. It's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. JavaScript is here to stay. It has its own syntax. Not everyone is a C# developer. There's a broad range of users out there. The point of Elsa is for it to be extensible and configurable and to offer options. Right now, all of these syntaxes, which are liquid JavaScript, and I think that's it. And now I will show you C#, and soon there will be Python. These are all optional. So right now they are hard coded, and they are enabled in the system in a hard coded fashion. So there's no way to opt out of it at the moment. But it will be all configurable so that you can choose which flavors, which syntaxes you want to support in your own system. So nobody's removing anything anytime soon. So that's C#. And I mentioned file storage module. So let's just start with these. And if you guys come up with any questions or topics as we go, just let me know.
I have a few questions about the workflow context implementation, but for the end of the meeting, start with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can go with that as well. Any additional topics you would like to add to the agenda?
Maybe I just check. It's about the cascading drop-down list and yes, the runtime option provider. Just to discuss, because maybe I can work on this feature and to get some input to code on the right direction.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so I was in the middle of adding run C# activity, but it's not finished yet. So I commented out so that at least the project builds. And hopefully I didn't break anything, so that would mess up the demo. But let's see how far we get. So this is the server and this is the Blazor. All right, so first let's show well, since we are on the topic of C# expressions anyway, I might as well start with that. First, a very simple example. So here we have a write line activity. And here, as you can see, we have a new option called C#. This is actual C# code. So what I'm doing here, I'm defining a little function. And here I'm going to invoke the function, and the result is multiplied by 2. And so the result of this expression will be used to write a line to the console. And when we execute this, if I didn't break anything, it should work. And there you go. So that worked out quite nicely. And it's actually pretty cool because we can write any C# code here that we like. Out of the box, not all of the assemblies and namespaces are imported, but the system namespace is there. And I think I also added the link. For a fact, I did add the link statement, which allows you to do things like this. So here I have a sum workflow, which can be used as a reusable activity. So this workflow can be used as an activity, and it accepts numbers, which is an array of long integers as input. And then it will return the sum of these numbers. So for that, I'm using link. So here too, I'm using C# to set the output for this workflow. And here you can see I'm using context, which is a global object. providing access to variables and inputs. And in this case, the input is called number. So here we can just use numbers. And sum is a link extension method on the enumerable class, I think. So very easy to use. We can use it in this workflow here called calculator. So here's the workflow we were just looking at. And as you can see, for the input, I'm just providing an array of numbers, which, by the way, is also C#. Could also change to JavaScript, which makes for very interesting use cases. So you can have one activity using JavaScript, another one could be C#, and everything just works, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so here I'm returning this list, providing it as input for sum, and then the output is captured in a variable called sum, which then is being written to the console here, again using C#, but as I mentioned, could be JavaScript as well. So when we execute this, we see indeed the input was this array. The sum of these numbers is indeed 6, and that's being written here. 1 second. All right. Yeah, and just one note on accessing variables. As you may know, when you use C# or sorry, JavaScript, let's take a look here. But actually, let's use a run JavaScript thing here. So let's say we want to access some variable here. Let's call it variable 1. And now let's imagine we want to access the value of this variable. In JavaScript, you would do something like this: get variable 1. So here it's accessed as a function. So this function is dynamically generated before the JavaScript expression is evaluated. And that's, of course, based on these variable names. So this is how you would get it. And this is how you would overwrite the value of this variable, like so. But now with C#, I can't show it here because we don't have the run C# activity yet, but let's do it here. Here we could say context dot variable 1 equals whatever. So the syntax is more closely aligned with what you may expect when you have a variable called variable 1. Here you can just access it as variable 1. Yeah, so that's a little different. And then the way it works is, of course, by leveraging C#'s getter and setter accessors for a property, in this case on the global context.
It uses the same version of C# of the project?
So it relies on Roslyn, so it references the Roslyn packages. So whatever those packages use, maybe it uses the current project. I don't know how it works internally, to be honest.
Okay.
So here you see this one is being referenced. Yeah, so as you can see, variable integration has been implemented, but none of the other functions that we do have in JavaScript, like I think I have a few of them documented here, JavaScript. So here we have things like getting outputs, getting the last result. All this we covered, so this is here. But then there's things like get workflow instance ID, correlation ID, etc. So those functions still need to be added to the. But yeah, so this is more of an early experiment. It was quite easy to integrate, and it's just gonna become more enhanced as we continue. And as I mentioned, we need to make it extensible so that not everyone automatically gets JavaScript and C# and Liquid and all of those things, but you want to be able to configure this at the application level. And I will probably do it once I also added Python as a syntax using Iron Python, and then because then I have enough samples or examples of implementations that I can see, okay, what is common, what should be reusable, and which parts should be made configurable. So yeah, so that's all I have for C# expressions.
So
And
for now, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We cannot use external libraries like, I don't know, Newton soft JSON, for example.
yeah, actually you totally could. It is extensible. So for example, here's an example of how to extend it. So this is just a mediator handler, a notification handler, which handles the evaluating C# notification. And this notification carries three things. The script that's being built. So here you can add stuff to the script. And here's the script options, which allows you to add assemblies and namespaces, and the expression execution context itself for having context about the current activity being executed for which you are evaluating input expressions. So And this is already used here as an example. Let's see. Well, maybe here I'm not adding any references, but here for sure I am. 1 second. No, that's changed. Here, the Roslyn C# evaluator. So as you can see here, because you get access to the script options, which has an API to add references to assemblies. So I'm adding the current assembly. The global class exists in this project, so it's adding the current assembly as an assembly reference to the script being evaluated. What's this then? Oh, and type of enumerable. This is how I add the system.link assembly. And here I'm adding using statements using the add imports API. So it's adding the namespace of the globals thing, which is Elsa C# models. So all the models will then be available that I have here, and all of the system link namespace. So similarly, from your application or your own module, you can handle the notification that I showed here. So this one, and it gives you access to the script options as well as the script. And the script is being used here by generating a class on the fly, which is a workflow variables wrapper, which is what allows me to dynamically and yet strongly typed it. That's how it seems when you actually use it from the designer, where you can access the workflow variables directly. So as you can see here, I'm generating a public property. The friendly type name is actually the type name of the variable. So it is truly strongly typed, the variable name, of course. And so the variable becomes a property of this workflow variables wrapper class, which I instantiate here into a local variable context. So that's why you saw that I did context.variable1, for example. And you can do this too from your own application.
Nice.
This handle async will be executed each time we use the script. Okay. Do you already have some information about memory consumption or disposing resource when you use dynamic?
I didn't do any investigation in terms of that, but I do know that there is a performance hit every time it needs to parse the script, and maybe even internally it generates an assembly. I don't know, but there's so there's some additional work there to see where we can optimize by generating the assembly once or compiling the code once and then reusing it. But it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's so dynamic in nature, right? Because it's gonna, every context or every activity can be different. So we need to do some research there.
Yes.
So
okay.
yeah, so right now it would be execute much slower when compared to JavaScript.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll fix that.
Is it limited to writing scripts, or can I, for example, define a class and then use the class in the script?
Let's try it out. I think we can. I didn't actually try a class. I did try a function here, but I think we should be able to do so. So let's delete this. Let's say class. Oh, missing some semicolon, it seems here. Yeah, easy. And you know what's going to be very cool?
Right.
So there's going to be a little module called probably something like functions or function definitions or something like that. So you, from the left-hand side, you will have the ability to build a library of scripts. So it could be a set of JavaScripts, could be a set of C# classes that you will be defining, and all of those scripts will be loaded into the C# evaluator in this example. So instead of creating classes like here, you will be able to do it straight from the studio and then leverage it in all of your scripts.
For this, I think when you use function, it could be useful to compile the set of function in a temporary library, because with this we can load and dispose the library and the assembly and refresh it.
What do you mean by refresh?
If you add a new function, you need to unload the previous and reload the new assembly. But if you unload correctly, you can dispose all your resources and just keep your resources for your server little consumption.
Yeah, there's actually some, I think there was I don't know if I still have it open. Yeah, there's some information on those scenarios, I think, on the Rustly and GitHub project. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So we can pre-compile or compile the script library so that all you have to use is just the assembly output so that it's optimized and you don't have the additional overhead. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a good idea. So, but yeah, so as I said, it's very early days, but I'm going to merge it so that you can try it out, play around, get some feedback, and we can evolve it over time.
But it's very promising.
I think so. It was already, it's so useful, and it's even very limited in terms of when compared to JavaScript in terms of the functions that you can add. But it's yeah, it was yeah, it feels more solid to me as well for some reason. I don't know, maybe because I'm a C# developer, it's just more convenient. One thing that's missing, of course, is IntelliSense. Integration with the variables. So you will want to be able to see the variables and the activity names when they are here. The same story goes for the JavaScript implementation. So that's still pending. And of course for Liquid as well. But that will come in due course as well. All right. So one other thing I wanted to show is a new activity called the save file activity. So what we have here is a new category called storage. And for now, it just has two activities. It's called save file, which will save a file to a configured storage provider. So at the application level, you can configure Fluent Storage, which is a open source library that abstracts away access to things like Azure Blob Storage, AWS, and many more, even FTP, and of course local file storage. And that's configured at the application level, which also means that all of these activities, open file and save file, they use the same configured blob storage provider. And the way it works, I will first show how it works, and then I will talk a little bit about some enhancements that I have in mind. So let's take a look at the save file first. So for inputs, you can provide it with some data and a file name. So this could be anything like a binary data, like an array of bytes. It could be a stream or just a regular text here. What we are going to do here is for this demo is we are going to receive a file through the HTTP endpoint. So we're going to post a file using Postman to this workflow. And then the file we're going to capture in the JSON files variable, which I defined here. So this is an array of form files. So this will be mapped to that variable. And then we're going to access the first file. We'll just upload one. We're going to access it here like this. So we're going to say get JSON files, then just the first item. And here we are accessing the file name, which is included as part of the HTTP request when we submit files using, form data. So here I prepared a little Postman script called workflows policies. So we're going to upload a policy, or an imaginary policy, which is a file here. It's just a JSON file in this example. Could be anything, right? Could be PDF or whatever you want. So we're going to send it to the server. But my point was that this file name is accessed here through the file name because that's part of the form file object, which is part of ASP.NET Core. So, and yeah, I mentioned we can configure the storage provider. I prepared this demo using blob storage on Azure. So I'll show you that first. So here we have bundles. This is the workflow server. And then here we'll see use file storage. It's a good thing we check because this would default to just using local disk, which will work as well. But here I'm going to actually use blob storage. So I prepared a little SAS URL, which I have in my environment as an environment variable. So I'm not going to show it here on the recording, but that's where it's going to be fetched from. So I'm just getting a connection string which represents a SAS URL. And just to be clear, this storage factory comes from Fluent Storage, and here it's using blobs, and it has a function called from connection string or something like that. And then depending on the scheme of your connection string, it will use, for example, FTP, or in this case, Azure Blob Storage. And this is a specific extension method to initialize the storage provider with a SAS URL. But there's, in fact, let's have a quick look. So here you can see they have, well, the standard provider, which is local disk, AWS, Google Cloud Provider, I suppose, and all of these things. All right, let's start this one. Oh yeah, and then finally we will just return 200 OK and the file name that we have uploaded. So let me publish this, and then I will fire away this request. Oh, this is the wrong environment, so this is going to be local. So this worked out. We received 200 OK and this this result here, and we just see the file name being echoed back, which we can then use here to then go ahead and download the file. And for that, we have a different workflow called download, which will listen at the policies path and uses a route parameter called file name. So we are then going to capture this file name using the file name variable, using a set variable activity. So we just use get route data file name. Route data, by the way, is also a variable here, and it's mapped to the root data variable here. So here we then access the contents of this variable, get the file name property out of it, and then we used a new activity called open file, which is this one. And this as an input just expects you to provide a path, and you don't have to provide any full URL or anything because it leverages the pre-configured blob storage provider. So yeah, it's gonna open it, and then here we are gonna just return the stream. So the open file, its output is actually a stream, as you can see, a .NET stream, which is captured in this file. Which here, I didn't create any, I didn't register stream as an available variable type, so I had to use object, but I will enhance it a little bit, at least the example, to show the ability to also have a stream type as well. And notice, by the way, this is very important, especially when you're dealing with large files, that the storage for, in this case, the file, it's set to memory, because if you set it to workflow, it would serialize the stream, or it would attempt to serialize the stream as part of the workflow instance, and that will most likely fail, or if it succeeds, then it will quickly blow up the size of your workflow instance document, which is not good. All right, so let's see if this works. So here I'm gonna download using this file name, and you already saw the result here. All right, so about the enhancements that I have in mind, I mentioned this uses a pre-configured blob storage provider, but actually, what about scenarios where you want to maybe upload a file to blob storage? Maybe there's some other processes happening in the background, and somewhere in the same workflow or a different workflow, maybe you want to get some files from a completely different location, maybe FTP, for example. In the current setup, this would be impossible without writing custom code and doing things yourself. So what I want to introduce is a concept called connections, similar to Azure Portal, where you can define a set of connections that you can then use in the case of Azure DevOps, I should say, not the Azure Portal, but Azure DevOps, which you can then use in your build steps or in your build pipelines. And similarly, I think it would make sense here to have a little library of connections to all sorts of cloud providers. And in this particular example, a set of connections to storage providers, so that you can choose from a drop-down list. Maybe there will be an additional option here. And then you select from a little list whether you want to store it in Azure Blob Storage or AWS or some FTP connection that you have provided. Yeah, so that's an enhancement I have in mind for the roadmap.
As extensions of, sorry, again.
Can it be clubbed with the credential manager idea that we had in Elsa 2?
Yeah, so in Elsa 2 we have secrets. That is in concept very similar, and maybe even the same. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I have to think through a little bit more if they could be exactly the same, or if there's a conceptual or even practical difference between the concept of a connection versus a secret. Because maybe a connection can leverage a secret, but a secret may not necessarily always be a connection, right? A secret could also be a password. So yeah, we would have to give some more thought to that.
It could be a type. Maybe we can say it's a secret of a type of a file
Yeah.
provider or something.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's the case in Elsa too, where you can have different types of secrets. And indeed, maybe one type of such a secret could be a connection, but it could also be different types of connections. For example, maybe there's connection strings. In this case, of these storage activities, they would have a very specific type of connection because it would have to integrate directly with the Fluent Storage API. I think, as I mentioned, I haven't thought it through entirely yet, but those are some of the things to consider.
Yeah, for me, the connection is some kind of configuration of maybe a basic configuration for any activity. So here you talk about open file, but we can also see the connection like some parameter for the call HTTP endpoint, the send request, not a HTTP endpoint exposition, but the send request, HTTP request, yes. In this, you have a URI, method, a content, maybe a bearer, authorization. And for me, a connection could also be the endpoint, the server endpoint. So every configuration property here. And for example, you can choose, okay, I will fill these properties with the connection HTTP1, for example. And we have a connection HTTP1 of type HTTP request. So we can search for this connection to fill the property in this activity. And indeed, as Mohamed said, we can configure this connection using secret. For example, the bearer could be stored as a secret. You see the point?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just to clarify, let's say we have a connection for, let's say, the authorization here. Would you use it as an expression, or would you have a drop-down list that you can maybe switch to? And this would, instead of a free form text field, this would be a drop-down list to select one of the predefined connections that you have.
Yeah. Yes, for me it's more a drop-down connection, but not near this specific property. It's more common in the activity. You have a select connection drop-down. You select, for example, HTTP1, and because you select this configuration, this will fill maybe 2 or 3 properties, authorization, URI, maybe a method, and we can think about it will be more black or bold, and this is because configured by a connection, and you can configure the rest of the properties. A shortcut.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm not sure I like it, but I will give it some thought. And maybe what we should do is explore some of these use cases and how it, is, and see if we can figure out the best UX for this sort of thing.
And just the idea behind this is the inter-environment transport of your configuration. When you need to move from dev test to production, you don't need to change anything in your activity. You just need to change your connection, your connection value.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And this is true. So, but I think at the very least, what we would have is expressions that we can use. So just forgetting about the connections for a second, you would, for example, use JavaScript, where you would say get, I don't know, config, and then maybe some name of your config. Just a very simple example, right? Okay. So at the very least, you would have an API exposed through JavaScript, C#, Liquid, etc., to access this configuration, because that's a very good point that you made. But yeah, let's figure out the best UX, because we also want to make it easy. And I can also imagine maybe there should be a drop-down list from which you can select one of the existing configurations.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some additional questions in terms of how big is this list going to be? Does it need to be categorized or filtered somehow based on type or per activity type? There's a million questions I can think of. I think it would be good to maybe start a little discussion or an issue, and we can explore the use cases and also draw some inspiration from Elsa too, where there's the secrets module.
So switching the environments is very important because we also had a similar use case where we developed a very complex workflow. We were testing it in a test environment, and that was done in Elsa too. So we had to put the connection string somewhere. But when we wanted to switch that workflow to the production, so we needed to make sure that we had the right connection strings, we had the right addresses updated properly. So it's important to have this in mind. And we also have another use case what we are thinking about right now, which is about communication with the SAP, with SAP. So in that case, maybe there is some credentials for communication with SAP. We don't want to expose it to the user, but we still want them to be able to query the data from SAP and receive it in the workflow.
Yeah, exactly. That's another wonderful example of a use case where you need access to some library of secrets and or connections, very similar to maybe and I also think there should be integrations with systems like Azure, Key Vault, and similar services like that. So we will probably provide something out of the box where everything will be stored encrypted, but there's also real services out there to store your secrets, and we should be able to leverage that as well as an option. All right, very good. So that was C# expressions, file storage, workflow context questions.
Okay, first question. In Elsa 2, I have the possibility to set the workflow context ID before I start the workflow via code, from code. It's possible in Elsa 3 to set the workflow context object or ID before I start a workflow?
Good question. I don't know actually. Let's see if we can find out. So workflow at this one. So to be honest, I don't think currently in the current iteration there is a way to, or if there's even a notion of ID. So I think it will be entirely up to your context provider to get the ID that you want to use to load your entity or your context, your workflow context. It will be up to you. You get access to the workflow execution context, which you could use to, for example, get the correlation ID, or maybe even some input or even some property. I think is also you will be able to get a property, but there's no activity. Or actually, you were talking about programmatically invoking a workflow through probably some workflow runner service or something like that. I don't think that's exposed at this moment, but let's see how it works in Elsa 2.
In Elsa 2, now let me see.
Yeah, here you have an actual argument called context ID. And here in Elsa 2, the concept of workflow context is part of the core API. But in Elsa 3, it's an optional module that you can use if you want to, but it's optional. So if you don't use the workflow context module, you won't be able to do anything with it. So it's designed a little differently, but it's entirely possible that it doesn't currently capture all of the use cases. For example, your use case, if you're looking for a way to pass in some identifier that you can then use from within your workflow context provider, might be an omission at this moment. So it's a very good question.
My main flow is to manage a sales order. So my entity order is the base of all the flow. In Elsa 2, I find the startable workflow before I launch it. I dispatch it and set the workflow instance ready. So now in Elsa 3, I need to add an input or an input before started, and the provider get from there.
Yeah, that will be the case currently. Doesn't mean it has to stay this way, but let's see. What if we use workflow runtime, which is a high-level service to start and trigger workflows? So let's say start workflow, we have some options. So here we can provide some inputs, which would be possible, but we also have to keep in mind that the workflow context provider is not only invoked when a workflow starts, but also when it's resumed. And in that case, maybe your input is no longer there, so it might not be the ideal method to use the input. So maybe what I need to think about it, because we need to keep in mind the ability to resume workflows, and your context provider ideally doesn't have to make a distinction between whether it was used the first time, so that you look in the input dictionary, and then the second time maybe it would have stored the thing in some properties object. So from that perspective of your context provider, you shouldn't have to care. But for now, working with this limitation, you could of course access the input here, which you provide here when starting a workflow. So you can do it, but yeah, just keep in mind the limitation I just mentioned.
Okay, and another question. There is a new activity for workflow context in Elsa Studio, in the designer. The new activity gives me an error from unsupported UI hint workflow context provider picker, because I think this activity is an alternative to set a workflow context if I use this activity at the start of the flow.
Are you referring to this activity, set workflow context parameter?
Yep.
And so if you use this one,
that's the error.
Yep. Yeah. So this has not yet been implemented. So if you can do me a favor, maybe you can create 2 issues or 1, but in any case, the first issue should be about your question, how to invoke, how to programmatically start a workflow, so that I can provide a workflow or a context ID or context parameter, as it's called here. Yeah, how does that work? Well, it doesn't work today. It's an omission, but then we can keep track of that. And then the second issue ideally would be about, requesting this to be implemented, so we can keep track of that.
Okay. It's not implemented yet. Okay.
It's not implemented yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but at least this thing, at least not in the Blazor Studio. It's possible that it works when you use the stencil designer, where you can just choose one of these pickers here, and then you can set a parameter name and a value. And actually, this is a good hint, because this does give me a clue that I did do some thinking about providing the value you want to use. So I will take a look into this in more detail. Actually, I'll do it right now. Set workflow context parameter, because it's also possible I just forgot about the way to do it, and maybe it's already there. So here we have set workflow context parameter. So internally, what is it doing? Here's the execute. So here it gets the provider type. So that's your custom workflow context provider that you would select from this list that's currently not implemented. Then the parameter name, that is this thing here. And then what the hell is get scope parameter name? Get a scope parameter. Okay, I'll need to do some digging in my memory to understand what is a scope parameter, but let's ignore that for now. So, okay, so let's say we have some parameter name and then the value, and then here I see. So, okay, so this is the intended usage. So it's gonna, and now I also understand scoped, because it's gonna use the set property of the workflow execution context, which is a global object. Well, it's global to the workflow itself, the workflow instance. And that's why it needs a scope parameter. So it's gonna use some sort of prefix as to not collide with parameter names that you would maybe be using with other workflow contexts. So it's going to use set property, which also means that we need the ability to, when starting a workflow programmatically, to set a given property upfront. So I think this module, workflow context, needs to provide some sort of maybe an extension method of sorts, and possibly there needs to be an update to the core APIs to allow you to set a given property. So, but it should be made very easy for you to use, to specify just a parameter name and a parameter value, and probably also the type of workflow context provider. Those 3 things, that you need to be able to provide that when starting a workflow. Yeah. So yeah, if you don't mind creating those two issues,
Okay, no problem.
then we won't forget about it.
Okay.
All right. Well, very good question. I completely forgot about this thing here, but yeah, we'll fix it.
Last question. If with this activity we can select the type of the context.
Yep, exactly.
Uh,
So here
for
on the
what we
right-hand side,
use, we
sorry,
can
go ahead.
only check one of these in the configuration, in the properties of the workflow, the right side.
This section, you mean workflow context?
Yeah.
So this is where you enable the providers for this workflow.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say you mentioned sales orders. Maybe there's customers that you want to also be available to your workflow at all times. Then you could select
Okay.
both. And this means you would always be able to say in your expression, say context dot, I don't know, customer, or maybe this is going to be context dot workflow context. I have to figure this one out, the exact syntax. But here you would then, this would give you the customer object loaded by your customer context provider, and the same goes for order. Then you can access both.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, which
Thanks.
is a big enhancement compared to what Elsa 2 has, where you would only have one context provider for each workflow.
Yeah, manage 2 or 3 entities itself.
Yeah, you would have to wrap everything up in a single object yourself, and in your context provider would then have to load all 3 objects whenever the provider is invoked. But here you can can be more granular. Does that answer your questions for now, or did you have some?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Great questions. Then let's continue to Cascading, DropDownList, and Runtime Options Provider. Jay, you had some questions?
Yes, because if we look at the implementation now, the runtime option provider are loaded using the registry. When we first launch a workflow, when we first create a workflow, or in notification, when we update, save, or publish the workflow. What we want to do is to be able to refresh an option provider, but maybe not each time we go to the activity. So when we click on the activity, we display the form, and the first option could be to reload and call an HTTP endpoint to reload the option provider each time we click on the activity. We can also, maybe when we have an option provider, maybe we can just add a refresh button on the right or on the left of the dropdown to force the refresh and avoid HTTP calls that are not necessary.
So what are do you have an example of a use case where the user will want to press the refresh button?
My use case is I populate the dropdown using an external API. So the repository is outside of Elsa context, and it could change during the creation of the workflow, or maybe I quit Elsa, I create a new asset outside Elsa, I return to the workflow, and I don't want to save, publish, or reload the entire engine of Elsa to refresh the dropdown.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. So yes, we need a way for this thing to be able to make an API call to the backend so that it can get. That's one. And then the second part to this is, at which point should it invoke this backend API? And you're saying, well, not every time when you click on this thing to open, because that's unnecessary. The option is an option, having a refresh button, but I don't like it as much, because it for one, it clutters the UI a little bit, and I'm thinking if it would be good enough if you just, whenever you highlight an activity, at that moment it will just make a refresh, and we can maybe optimize it a little bit, maybe using leveraging the HTTP options request, where it checks maybe some, and this might be a little bit too fancy, but maybe it can check some checksum, or not a checksum, but a hash or some signature to see if it changed or not. And if it didn't change, then, well, of course, then you have the question, how do you compute this hash? But then caching could be an answer to that, but then it becomes a little bit more, potentially more complicated than necessary. But still, I would probably opt for making the API call to the backend every time you select. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because even if it's an expensive call, it could be up to your options provider that's executed at runtime to do the optimization. Maybe it has some caching validation. If it's a very expensive call and in the backend something has changed or this list has changed, then you could always evict your cache, and then Elsa itself, doesn't need to know about any of that. It just makes the API call to the Elsa backend every time, and then that invokes your options provider, and then it's up to your options provider to be as performant as possible.
Okay, and so for this, if I look correctly, we have to work on the drop-down component of the studio.
Yes.
When it change where it display, I don't remember the term in a Blazor, but when it's display, we can call the API. So we need to also create in core an API with as an input the type of the option provider, the registry in DI, and we need to refresh the registry and call the option provider implementation. So as we do when we first load the workflow.
I'm not sure what you mean by the registry. What registry is this?
It's where it is. When we call the descriptor activities endpoint, and in this we use the registry, and at this point we load all the information about the activity, and if there is an option provider, we call the option provider.
So I was thinking maybe we can do it a little bit differently. So let's say we are here. So as you can see here, we're using an options provider. So this is a hard-coded thing here, and this is called, let's see, property options resolver. This is called get options. Yeah, so this is called when the input descriptors are being created. So this happens at application runtime. So I was thinking, what if we, and I don't know the details for now, but to either have the ability for the options provider itself to have some sort of flag or configuration where it basically says evaluate me every time whenever the activity is opened, or maybe even refactor a little bit the options provider here. So just as a silly example, we could also have a runtime options provider as a new property. And I'm not saying we have to do it like this, but it could be an option. And in this way, it's the entire system already knows that, oh, if this thing is configured with a type, then the studio knows to make a call whenever the activity is loaded. So that could be an option.
Okay.
Yeah, but another option could be to have something on the iActivity property options provider here. Maybe it could be it could be done through an attribute, a C# attribute, or maybe a Boolean here that says runtime, and that would then be set to true by implementations. I'm just using silly names here, but just to offer a few potential options for implementation. But in any way, this way we don't have to refresh the registry. I think that's the biggest point. Yeah.
Okay, and so the UI and the dropdown call an API to get the content of the dropdown and directly fill the dropdown in the studio. And not touch on the registry. I think it's done like this in Elsa 2 with an API, and we just get the result.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I will inspire with the Elsa 2. Okay.
Yeah, nice.
A quick last question for me. When you configure an activity, if you can just display the designer, yes. Here you have the set variable, okay, and in OpenFile you use, for example, you can use get variable one, okay, in JavaScript. What do you think about having another item in the dropdown? So we have a C# expression, JavaScript, and add a variable. And when we use variable, we can directly, as in the output design, select the variable.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I had the exact same thought. I don't know if I captured it in an issue, but I completely agree with that suggestion. I think it makes a lot of sense. For many use cases, it simplifies things a lot because now, well, I've seen many workflows where all the inputs are doing is just doing get variable blah. And so it makes a lot of sense to just be able to pick one from the list. And even for certain activities, like, well, this is not a, well, it's a good enough example just to make my point. Here, this is a drop-down list where you always select a variable name. Of course, for the set variable, you don't want the variable to be set, be dynamic, at least not in the use cases that I can think of. But there are some activities where maybe the default UI, it would make sense for that to be just a variable and even an input picker. Let me see if I can find a good example. Yeah, I don't recall, but there are some activities where the default UI should just be a variable picker. And if you did want to use some custom value, you can always switch it to JavaScript or Liquid or things like that. But in majority of those cases, you want to pick a variable. But I really like that as an additional option here.
Okay.
Maybe for each loops, you most likely are going to use a variable.
Yes, the for each loop. Thank you. That's yes, exactly. So this one here, items. Here it's already dropped down list. It just needs to actually be replaced with a variable picker.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can always switch to C# or JavaScript to do something else. Maybe like this.
Great.
Yeah, nice. Anyway, yeah. Oh, the parallel for each still needs a good color, a purple color, and it needs an icon. It's a good getting started issue for starters. All right, so right on time, I think. Any questions or any sort?
In the future, we will have a version of for each in Flow version.
Maybe. So we could have it. So let's see. So right now we don't have it, but let's just try something. So let's see. We have. Let's say we have this and we want to. So here we already have a loop, but your idea is probably, well, let's actually take a look
like
at
Elsa 2.
Elsa 2. I did say real quick, but previously writer doesn't care what I say. Still loading. Well, while this is loading, so let's say we have a for each flow activity, which makes sense. You would have a done outcome probably and an iterate outcome. And then the iterate outcome you would use to attach activities to that you want to execute for each iteration of the for each activity. But then there's a few questions. Should you then connect the last activity of the iterate branch back to the for activity? Is that what you would expect, or would you expect not to do so? So that's one question. And depending on the answer to that question, it might become a little bit tricky because in Elsa 2, where we do have this already, the implementation of trying to determine when the last activity executed and then scheduling for each activity again. It's quite tricky and prone to error, and I don't like that implementation at all. And actually, this is a big reason for big motivation for re-architecturing the entire Elsa engine, which is now Elsa 3. But because of this new architecture, there could be a better way to do that implementation. And one improvement that I did have in mind for this particular use case, where you have a for each flow activity, is to have a new type of input. So right now, all activities have just this little input port, and it's called in. But we could also have like for each activity, for example, we could have another input port, which could be called something like, I don't know, iterate or repeat or whatever. Then maybe the name doesn't even matter as much. But the point of this extra input port would be to allow you to connect the final activity in the iterate branch back into that import, because then it becomes, in terms of the implementation, it becomes very easy to determine when to schedule the next iteration, because the activity is now scheduled for execution and it would know it was triggered through the second import. That's one benefit, and an additional benefit is that visually, when you model your design like this, visually it's also a loop. So in Elsa 2, let's see if it's loaded. Looks like it's loaded. So let's take a quick look at. Actually, this is not a good example. Let's create a new workflow real quick. So let's say we have for each. So here we have the iterate branch and then the done branch whenever. So here we could say maybe send an email, and then right now what it would do, it would, for each item, it would send an email, and then once everything is done, then this gets executed. So it would say done. For example, this implementation is very tricky to get right. I'm never going to touch it again, because as soon as I do, it will break. I guarantee you. But for Elsa 3, what we could do is, for example, connect this one back to this one. So it looks a little bit weird because now there's no longer a starting activity. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay, so here we have a visual loop. We go to for each, and then it's going to iterate 3 times. And then from each iteration, now it's going to go back into the for each. You shouldn't do this in Elsa 2 because it's going to behave strangely. But in Elsa 3, I can imagine there might be an input, a special or an additional input port to connect back to the for each. And then the implementation, as I mentioned, becomes, and visually, it also actually looks like a proper loop, because when we remove this, now, unless you know about it, it's not very clear that this is going to iterate multiple times. But I do like the idea of having looping constructs for flowcharts. Right now, we only have looping constructs for sequence kind of setups, like this one, where we have embedded ports. This implementation is very easy because this is a property of this activity, and then whenever this property, which is an activity, completes, then the for each knows, oh, okay, let's schedule the next one. But doing it in a flowchart, if it's done explicitly, as I mentioned, with the additional input port, then it becomes easy as well, and also good for the user to use.
In the parallel for each, it waits for the body, for all the iterations in the body complete, to then continue the execution for the DOM.
Yep, let me show you. So
in Elsa do now I'm doing magic to
Elsa
to work with the parallel for each.
I don't I'm not surprised that you have to use magic there, because in Elsa 2 parallel for each, the only thing it does is it's just schedules the iterate at the same time, and then it gets executed in sequence. but there's no regard for, if you set a variable within the iterate branch, that all of the activities will execute one after another, and then the next activity will use the last value that was set, for example. So it's not very suitable, unless the only thing you need to do is just schedule a bunch of activities at the same without any need for suspending the workflow within a loop or having variables within this loop. If so, it's a really limiting factor. But in Elsa 3, it's completely different. So here we have a new workflow, and let's say we have parallel
I don't need
creates.
join or anything. If in the iteration of parallel for each I have a user task, for example, that suspend the branch until all the branch are completed, the flow not continue.
Correct.
Thanks God.
Yep. Yeah, it was a big issue in Elsa 2, a big omission, if you will. So here we have 3 items. So let's say we do it as follows. So we just write the current item here. So let's say get current value. So it's going to print current value. Then we're going to have, I don't have a user task in Elsa 3 yet, but we have something else called event. This one. So this is a blocking activity like user task. It should not be blue. It should be just a blocking activity. So like that. And here we're going to wait for some input. Then we say white line.
Sorry for the time.
No worries. This is fun. And Ali, are you still awake? I know it's late for you.
Yeah. I'm keeping up.
I'm sorry, I need to go. For me.
No worries.
Okay.
We'll keep recording. Thanks for
See you.
joining, Jay. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. And then we say and get value this. Okay, so let's save this. We are in the parallel for each. So now let's run this. Okay, so this has not yet completely. Oh, sorry. I want to show what. Well, you ask, would it continue only after everything internally has completed? So just to show that, let's do it like this as well. So here we say workflows and workflow end like this. Okay, so this is workflow start. Now we are here. We go into the body. So right line has executed 3 times, which makes sense because it's a parallel and this one has executed 3 times as well, but they are waiting for to be triggered. So let's say we want to resume this one. Here we have an activity instance ID. This is important to use if we want to target a specific event. And let's see if I have an existing API. So events is some input, and we want to trigger this event, but we also want to provide activity instance ID. So to be honest, I'm not sure if I actually updated the event API. So let me have a quick activity instance ID. And so we should be able to put it here. And this should then trigger just that event for that instance. So it says, okay, let's see here. Let me refresh. I think I may have forgotten something. Maybe I also need to include the workflow instance ID. Event name is. I think I need to include the workflow instance ID. Let's try that. Do you still have some time, or is it too late for you? Because
I'm okay.
Okay, then if you don't mind, I'm gonna just see what happens with the debugger attached. This used to work. Let me say it like that. Oh, so here the events, it does say, oh, but why still running? That's interesting. So you see the events that they did come in, suspended, resumed, suspended. You know what? I'm gonna troubleshoot this after the call. I think it is. I might have broken something during some refactoring, and I'm gonna make sure I capture it with a integration test, so I don't break this scenario. But suffice it to say, this scenario works.
I trust you.
Once I fix this this issue, because as you can see, the setup is every iteration has its own activity instance. So because of that, we can precisely control which one to resume. And this parallel for each is designed in a way that as soon as all of its children have finished, so once this one resumes 3 times, right, then this will also finish 3 times or execute 3 times, which is the last activity in this body of the parallel for each. And then the parallel for each will, oh, I did stop the server, I think. Yeah. And I made an error, compilation error somewhere.
Thank you for your amazing job with Elsa 2, Elsa 3. It's amazing.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, trust
amazing.
me, it's a lot of fun to do. I'm very happy to do it.
For give you some context, we are using Elsa in a project for a telco company, and we use it for coordinate all the sales orders. You buy a package with an internet, a mobile, a TV, and we use Elsa to make all the flow to do the provisioning on network, on mobile, to notificate the billing
That's amazing.
service, all the stuff of the business core or business logic. We are using Elsa.
That sounds pretty amazing. And so I imagine you build a bunch of custom activities to do this provisioning or the network operations that you need to do.
Yep.
And do they execute asynchronously using background tasks, or are these very quick actions that need to be performed?
We are ending the MVP version of the system is a super CRM theory.
Yeah, sure.
In English, I don't know. We have external system that manage all the things of provisioning, asynchronously. And Elsa is the orchestrator of all this.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And you're using Elsa to, right?
Yep. We are finished. I like to try to port to Elsa 3 before we go out for production. And I'm following so close the new features and the advance of the new version, and amazing.
That's really nice. And also this means, because then you're, well, obviously, you have good experience with Elsa 2, and you are not yet in production, so you're gonna see what it takes to port to Elsa 3, which will be a great opportunity also for me to learn more about what are the current missing features, because Elsa 3 is slated to be officially released January 1, 2024, regardless of whether it's finished or not. It's never going to be really finished, but I want to try and put in as much as possible that we currently have in Elsa 2 that people are actually, so that it is as feature complete as possible when compared to Elsa 2. But the biggest point for this release date is that from that point on, every update will be stable in terms of backwards compatibility without breaking existing data. So any inputs you have, as like what you gave this evening, which is pretty great.
For us, it's so important parallel for it, of course, because we have many branches that we need to be in parallel, and they are blocking as expecting a user interaction to continue the branch of the flow. So important too, the error management of the flow.
I missed the first part. Is that the user task? Is that what you mentioned, or did you mention?
The real parallel of the branches. So because when we are provisioning internet, mobile, TV, we need to be in parallel.
So you mean parallel for each, or you mean fork?
In this case, parallel for each, because they are part of a model that package has service and service have products. So we iterate for service in this flow. And many of these services need interaction of users that confirm or cancel the task. And in Elsa 2, so treat work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There, the closest thing you get is the fork, but you can't. But that's static. You can't base it off on a dynamic list, which is the purpose of parallel for each.
Yep. The services are dynamic, so I cannot predict and define all.
Yeah, exactly.
And another important point is the error management. So the new module of alteration, it's amazing. We need to have a lot of logs, monitoring of what is the exactly point where the workflow retrieve possibility from any point of the flow. Cancel the flows, all these tools to manage the flow.
To manage the flow at runtime, running
so
workflow
important
instances.
to the provisioning team in the company. So I'm excited with the new module of alterations.
And that's very interesting, because that perfectly aligns with one of my customers, who is really pushing for exactly those features that you mentioned: the ability to, manage running workflow instances, handle incidents by using the alterations feature, which is a direct contribution from them. And overall stability, security, and operations basically. So we're gonna focus a lot on in this area.
One of my product owners says a phrase with all these flows and the Elsa world, and it is make sure 100% that this will end. The flow needs to end.
The flow needs to end. I like it. Yeah, that's a good saying.
And again, thank you for your amazing job, your amazing project. Previously, I work with input in .NET with manual flows using Hangfire, using continue job with to manual define these flows of provisioning or business logic.
Did you use existing library for that, or did you roll your
Hangfire? Native.
Hangfire.
Yeah, I am an expert of Hangfire.
I really like it. I used it a lot also in combination with Elsa 2 for a customer.
When I see that Elsa 2 have integration with Hangfire and using.
So in Elsa 3, it's going to be even better. Right now, there's no direct module. I thought I had one, but I couldn't find it. So either I deleted it or I dreamt that I created it. But there's going to be integration with Hangfire from Elsa 3 as well, but even better than in Elsa 2. In Elsa 2, you could use Hangfire, but in Elsa 3, you can actually execute any activity that is either a job, which will always execute in the background, and then currently it uses an in-memory provider for running stuff in the background, but then there's going to be Hangfire, and that allows you to run any activity that's has the activity kind of job to execute in Hangfire, and activities that are of kind task, and tasks allow you to configure it in the designer itself. So for example, let's say we have
that's
HTTP.
amazing, because you can then make priority queues in Hangfire and
exactly
assign this kind of activities to more priority or not, or a group of work. We deploy a Hangfire server with 20 workers only for this kind of task, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And what's beautiful in combination with a workflow engine such as Elsa is you get to orchestrate the entire process. And so, for example, imagine the UI doesn't show it here because I didn't implement it yet. I'm gonna show it in the stencil implementation. But basically, let's remove this and whatever, it doesn't matter. So this thing now would execute in the background. So let's imagine this is a very heavy bit of work. So here it's an HTTP request. It is a task activity, and it will have an option to say, run me in the background. So what happens is that after this one executed, this one will be scheduled for execution in the background. So in the meantime, the workflow will just go to sleep. It will be persistent unless there's other work it needs to do, then it will perform the other work. But imagine you have a parallel for each of 100 items. All of these requests will execute at the same time in parallel. So you will have true parallelism in Elsa 3 by using background jobs. And Hangfire is, as you mentioned, it's a great background job runner.
The power of Hangfire with the layer of Elsa, it's a wet dream.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. That's so powerful. And yeah, wait, just to show you. And while this loads, I also want to show you this. This is the kinds that I was talking about. So you have this tasks. There's a few of them. So task and job. Job will always run in the background. Task depends on the user's preference. So here. By the way, where are you from, Borja?
Spain.
Spain. On this, I could have guessed. I'll give it one more try, and then I'm gonna give up.
So you will offer official support at the future, or for projects or companies like I working?
Yes, we are. We're working on commercial grade support, but we're still in the preliminary phases of exploring the interest, but also in terms of how to balance, the ability to continue developing the project. Because on the one hand, if we do full-time consulting and offering support, then we may not be able to continue on our roadmap in a timely fashion that we want to do. So it's about finding this balance between offering consultancy, professional support. There's also demands from some, to have P0 and P1 support. That's not something we will be able to offer in the short term, but we are thinking about ways to offer that in the future as well. But the first offering that we are looking to do is the ability to offer commercial grade support, and we are still figuring out in what shape and form this would be. If you have any interest in this, your feedback in terms of what you're looking for would be a good input for us to try and better formulate an offering. But we're definitely working on it.
With our customer, you have a secure super guaranteed. I don't know. Sorry for my English.
No worries. I think I understand what you're saying. So we can be assured to be paid for to have income for offering support. Is what I'm gathering. Nice. Yes. So that's of course very interesting for us because it also helps us sustain the project, because Elsa, the reason for its development is because of customers that are using it, and they need certain features prioritized, or they need support, and through those efforts we get to really make serious strides with Elsa and evolve it to a very stable a professional system. So that's very interesting for us.
With that customer, I think that with developer support will be okay.
Okay, yeah. So you don't need P0, P1 support, but developer support for consultation,
Yep.
that sort of thing. Yeah, that's great because that's gonna fit right in with what we are going to be offering.
Yeah, because they are outsourcing all the develop of their system. So the big bosses, open source project, they have support. Who use the library, that kind of things.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and if you like, I can add you to a little mailing list that we have. So once we have a little catalog of commercial support, we want to send out an email to all of our subscribers to this list. So if you like, we can
That would be
add you
nice.
to it. Sure. Yeah, just make sure to drop me your email either in the chat or via email, whichever you prefer.
That is.
All right. Okay. So I finally got the stencil thing to work. So what I wanted to show is this. Well, now this doesn't work, but that's okay. We'll try it like this. It's a request. Now I see it with my own eyes. So people were complaining about the thing not showing up anymore, and now I'm complaining about it as well. Okay. Now I also see why. If an error occurs when you click on this thing, then everything breaks. But this is the thing I wanted to show, the task tab, which has an execute asynchronously checkbox. When this is checked, then this activity will execute in the background. And this also allows you as an activity developer to very easily just create an activity. And if you want it to always run in the background, just mark it as activity client is job. Or if you want to control it from the UI, just mark it as task. And then you can do it from here. And in Elsa 2, you could do it as well, but you would have to basically schedule a Hangfire job from within your activity. And then your job would then have to receive the workflow instance ID and some bookmark information so that it could resume the workflow once the job finishes, but everything is handled transparently for you in Elsa 3.
It's amazing.
That's the word. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. So, well, thank you for joining. It was fun having you around, Borja. Unless you have any additional questions or topics you would like to go over, I still have an hour to go. Okay. Then we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. Maybe see you next time. We'll have this. We have this community meeting every Thursday at 6 p.m. UTC.
I will try.
Yeah, you're always welcome, and of course it's optional. So I'll see you around.
It's so nice, the meeting. I follow the videos in YouTube, but coming at the meet is better.
Yeah, it's great because you get to ask questions and get some impromptu demos, which sometimes work and sometimes they don't. All right, then I wish you a good evening, and I'll see you later. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
By the way, I was wondering, Ali, are you still there? You must be asleep already.
Yeah, I'm at time limit.
All right. Well, thanks both for joining. I'll
Thank you.
see you later.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.